everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. My name is Nick Palavita. I'll be your moderator for today's show and today's program. And today our discussion will be, should we abolish the Department of Labor and save $15 billion a year? Here's the argument that you want to look at. The real problem that we have in the United States right now, of course, is the national debt. And the national debt is around 33 trillion. We're adding 1.5 to 1.7 trillion more in debt this year due to the budget in 2024. If we were to eliminate, and this is just one department, Lord knows how much also we have in terms of in terms of debt that we're acquiring, we would save about $15 billion of that. So with that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. I'm always interested in saving money. And is this a place that we could save, $15 billion? And also, here's the other thing. All the states have their own Department of Labor, and the states have to balance their budget. We do not. So we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker and see about starting to cut some of the bureaucratic fat out of the bureaucracy. One of the best ways to save money is to cut the fat out. But nobody ever talks about cutting the fat. They just want to add more fat. But anyway, David, obviously you can see I'm not a fan of the Department of Labor, like definitely not a fan. And one thing I'm thinking about doing is working on eliminating the Department of Labor. Remember, they eliminated the federal estate tax. I remember that. Somebody got that whole notion started, and Lord behold, they actually eliminated the federal estate tax. I couldn't believe it. So I thought maybe it's about time we get rid of the federal Department of Labor and save $15 billion a year. Now, I did a Pod TV LinkedIn poll, 52%, it was really close, said yes, abolish it. 48 said no, keep it. So I'm going to change the poll a little bit and say, are you willing to increase your taxes to save the Department of Labor? In other words, hit them in the pocketbook, buddy, because it's easy to say, oh, yeah, let's just add more government. Let's keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I think you brought up an op-ed, it was through LinkedIn, about our national debt, $1 trillion. Do you know in the Biden administration, we're adding another $1.5 trillion to the national debt because he can't balance his bloody checkbook? And somewhere along the line, we got to start cutting these fat bureaucrats out. And this, because I have to interface with these people every now and then, this to me is one place which we can cut drastically and start saving money. Go on. Anyway, it's your floor.
Well, it's good to be back with you. I'm back in the country, and I can be with you until about 11:45 today. Let me first say that we need to disclose some information that people need to be aware of when we're commenting on the Department of Labor. First, I used to run the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which is related to the Department of Labor, but not within the Department of Labor. Secondly, I used to be Assistant Secretary of Labor for the Employee Benefit Security Administration, which is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which is within the Department of Labor. Thirdly, you're in the pension business and the benefits business, and you obviously have to deal with these two agencies that I just mentioned. But let me, if I can, kind of bring it up to macro, and then we can take it down to micro. The federal government has grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, and states' rights have been dramatically undercut. Under the Constitution, the federal government is only supposed to be doing things that otherwise can't be done by the states or by the people. And since 1912, we can go into that if you want, several things have happened that have caused the federal government to dramatically expand and to, basically federalize a bunch of things that historically would have been done by the states. My personal view is that we need a fundamental review and reassessment of what the federal government should do, who should do it, how it should do it, how we measure success, and how we allocate resources to try to achieve results. In doing that, one of the things that you would consider is To what extent is it something that's in the Constitution? To what extent is it something that needs to be done by the federal government? Because realistically, it can't be done by the states. And even if there are things that should be done by the federal government, they might be limited to oversight and enforcement, rather than running a broad range of programs that could be duplicative of what the states do. But if you look at the Department of Labor, given that background, and by the way, I'm hoping that we're going to get a fiscal stability commission soon that will end up looking at all forms of spending and revenues and make recommendations to try to be able to put our finances in order. And I think, frankly, one of the things that might come out of that is, the need for a special mechanism to be able to do what we're talking about today. There's also a need for a special mechanism to deal with other issues as well, like another round of base closures, if you will, and rationalizing the overhead within the Defense Department. But you can only do so much. With regard to the Labor Department, I'll give a few comments and then we can open it up. If you look at the components of the Labor Department, you have things like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is important, and that is a national function. It's not a state function. It's not a function that you can devolve to all the states and say, add up all your numbers and tell us what it is on a national basis. Secondly, you have the Employee Benefit Security Administration, which I used to run, and there's federal preemption. So the states can't do that because there's federal preemption of state laws with regard to ERISA. You do have, certain other functions, though, that theoretically could be done at the state level. You have the Employment and Training Administration. You have Occupational Safety and Health Administration. You have the Mine Safety and Health Administration. And there's at least one more that theoretically rises to the federal level, and that is the Bureau of International Labor Affairs. But, one of the things that we really need to do is that we need to not just pick particularly on one department, but recognize this is something that needs to be done across government. What most people talk about when they talk about devolving things back to the states, the one that comes up the most is the Education Department, which I think for a lot of reasons makes a lot of sense. But I do think that, it's not just a matter of what ought to be devolved, but what needs to be consolidated, because I think we have, frankly, too many departments and agencies. And the more you have, the more overhead, the more potential for inconsistency, the more potential for gaps. That's where I am as an opening statement, Nick.
Well, that's good. And you're right. I do have to interface with them, and I don't even want to tell you the horror stories.
I can imagine that may have something to do with why you want to.
Not just from the Department of Labor, but your friends at the PBGC. The PBGC, because they got overfunded. Remember, they lost $26 billion over the years. So they're $26 billion in the hole. Biden gave them like $60 billion. And you know what they're doing? They're auditing two-person plans. And I know that because I've got a stack of audits that come in all the time. And I look at, well, how many people are in this plan? 2 people. I said, it's going to cost more to do the audit than there is the total amount of assets in the pension plan. And I'm going, it's just a demonstration of government getting way too much money. They need to justify their job, so they're auditing 2-people plans. Well, no kidding.
For the record, let me note that when I was head of the PBGC, the single employer premium was $2.60 per participant. Yeah. Next year, it will be over $100 per participant. And in addition, there's a risk-based premium that could take it up to hundreds of dollars per participant. Yeah. And, the challenge is the government tends to measure success by the size of its budget, the number of its people. And you want to show that you're doing something, right? I mean,
that's exactly right.
And they don't consider cost benefit.
They don't see cost benefits. And when I'm seeing routinely 2-person plans being audited by the PBGC, it gets my Irish up, David, because I'm going like, do they have any clue that there's only 2 people in this plan and we're going to go through a 10-year audit? Right now I have one. I've got another one. I've got another one. In other words, it's starting to come in like airplanes. And I'm going, why are they? And they haven't done this, by the way, David, they haven't done this for 2 decades. I've been working. It's just recent. It's because your friend Joe Biden gave them more money than they needed to satisfy their liabilities. And they're all out there in the PBGC justifying their jobs. And they need to be called on. A lot of people don't even know what the PBGC is. Okay. But I have to deal with these clowns. And I'm furious because of the amount of money that they're throwing away of taxpayers' money today. Because guess who's paying for these 2-person audits? You are, David, I am, and all the people on the panel are going to be paying for that audit. Plus, my clients are paying for the audit. And I frankly don't need that type of work. But anyway, we'll bring in the other panelists that don't have to deal with the PBGC. And don't get me started with the Department of Labor, okay? Because they don't have a clue what goes on in the retirement area. But I'll bring in our panelist, Mega Society member, Rick Grosner, PD Master, Jim Eade, and of course our favorite, Kim Calhoun, president of the Pod TV network. So maybe I'll start with Kim, since you've had to interface with the government recently, and I know you've had some great things to tell about how much they were there to serve you.
Well, it's more about their misuse of power, of authority now. And I believe we do need some sort of somebody going in and ensuring integrity. There is no means to report the people who are misusing their power of authority. I don't consider the IRS government, but I do consider the IRS the government's mafia muscle. And pushing people around. I have no more respect for them. I've lost total respect for everything that our government was supposed to do for the people. They don't do anything for the people. So I believe that there needs to be some integrity offices put in place. And that's sad that we have to do something like that in our country. I think that the more departments that we have, the more corruption is able to occur. But, you know, Nick, I believe that what you're feeling is what I felt when the IRS came and attacked us. We did win the lawsuit because we proved that they lied, cheated. They lied on their transcripts. The state attorney general's office lied. But there was no one to report them to, and they had full immunity for putting us through hell for 3 or 4 years. And to top it off, they didn't pay me for 4 years the money they owed me. I had to finally go to a advocate agency to seek assistance to get money. And when I reached out to them, you know, their phone said, "Oh, don't expect to hear back from us for 3 months because we're so backlogged." Eventually they came in and they called me in 2 days after I faxed them my story and what was going on. And in 2 days I had a phone call, and in 1 week they had it resolved. But they paid me less than 0.01% interest when they taxed the consumer and the citizens 37% when they're late. So yeah, I agree with you. I think, and you know what, Nick, do me a favor and tell the world who this organization is, the PBDC.
The Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. They actually have a purpose, and that's to ensure pension plans, to make sure that if you have a pension plan that's underfunded or not properly funded, they come in and they satisfy the liabilities, usually because the plan sponsor mismanages the assets. And this is the old Studebaker case where the automobile industry, the company went under, the pension was mismanaged, and then all of a sudden, poof, they needed an agency to satisfy. It's an insurance company. But yeah, David, since you headed the PBC,
let me jump in.
Sure.
Nick is right that it really came about as part of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, which was passed in 1974. It was actually the first bill that President Ford, Gerald Ford, signed on Labor Day in 1974. And it came about because the failure of Studebaker, the fact that people had worked all their lives, Studebaker went under, the plan was not adequately funded, and people lost their pension. It's important to understand that it only insures private sector defined benefit pension plans. It doesn't insure government plans. It doesn't insure church plans. Secondly, that there's two major kinds of defined benefit pension plans. There's the single employer plan, where you have an individual company like Ford or GM or American Express or whatever, who end up offering a plan to their employees. And then there's something called a multi-employer plan, which is a jointly trusteed plan for unionized workers in certain industries, like in mining and construction and a variety of others. In the first case, they insure those plans if they terminate, and if the plans are underfunded when they terminate. And they insure them up to certain limits. And in many cases, those limits are significantly less than what people have been promised. So it's not guaranteeing the whole thing. It's guaranteeing a benefit up to a statutory amount. In the case of the multi-employer plans, they insure it when it goes insolvent. In other words, when it has no more money, and therefore they can't pay anything. Okay, I mean, it's zero. And you know, similar to kind of what happens with the Social Security Trust Fund. And although there is some money coming in, you know, when that goes to zero, that's what got bailed out. I mean, the Biden administration bailed out multi-employer funds to the tunes of tens of billions of dollars, you know, rather than having them take care of themselves. And like most federal insurance programs, liabilities exceed assets.
Yeah, and the thing is, see, working there for 22 years, David, I do fully insured, guaranteed pension plans, so we have no failure. This is the problem I have with also the whole concept of PBGC. The concept is heads, we win because we gambled in the stock market. Tails, you taxpayer lose and you pick up our bill. Okay, see, that's not right. You don't need to have that. Everything could be fully insured, pension plans, and then you would not need the PBGC anymore.
And
but
then
that would be eliminating a government agency.
Well, but then you have to be careful. You have to be careful about who's insuring. In other words, who are the private sector? Because let me tell you, I'm involved right now in a lot of work dealing with insurance companies. And as you know, Nick, there's three kinds of insurance companies. There's stock, there's mutual, and there's fraternal. Okay. Yeah. And there's a lot of crazy things going on with stock insurance companies, especially those that are controlled by private equity funds. A lot of offshore activities, a lot of reinsurance activities, a lot of investments in high risk assets. And I remember Executive Life, which at one point, was the largest insurance company in California, did a way disproportionate share of cashing out pension liabilities through annuity contracts, and went bankrupt in the early 1990s. But look, let's come back to where I started.
We got to go back to the original. We could talk a lot about.
We need to talk about what should the federal government be doing, how should it be doing it, who should be doing it, you know, and how do we measure success? I mean, and that applies to the PBGC, that applies to the Employee Benefit Security Administration, that applies to the Labor Department, the Education Department, everything, including the Defense Department. You know, we need to take a more comprehensive look, but we got to start somewhere. So we can start at the Labor.
I started in my backyard. But go on, Rick Rosner, Mega Society member.
So when the Cold War ended, more or less, when the Soviet Union fell, there was a thing I think called the peace dividend, which was we didn't have to spend as much money on defense for a while because our biggest enemy was gone. And I'm thinking at some point there should be an AI dividend across the whole government, where, including the military, including every department, where as technology gets smarter, it should be able to do a lot of the tasks that you're paying people to do. And, you know, like Kim, you had terrible experiences with the IRS. I've had better experiences with the IRS than you did, because the IRS is underfunded and broken. And my dad was a CPA for 60 years. And, you know, during many of those years, the IRS was to be feared, and you'd get dragged in for audits. And then the IRS got starved of money. And instead of auditors going after people, it was just a computer that would send you a letter saying, well, you said this on your taxes, and that doesn't make sense to us. Explain. And it was, for me at least, more benign than getting hauled in. And I'm thinking automation. You're talking about two-person pension organizations getting audited, which seems expensive. And you talked about how the cost of administration has gone way up. But the government needs to be, as a whole, as an overall policy, you need to see how much better technology can make it cheaper to run.
Yeah,
I think you're right, Rick, and that day is coming. But then the real question is how do you get that done? All right. It's like most things, when you're talking about major transformational change, that's tough work. Not everybody's going to be a winner. There are going to be a lot of losers. Okay. You have a number of forces that want to fight against something like that, not just organized labor, which the largest percentage of workers that are organized is in the government, not the private sector. I mean, it's not even close. In addition to that, you have members of Congress that are concerned about their constituents, who might be government workers. So there's absolutely no question that we need to do something like that. But to do something like that is going to take a special process. The idea that this is going to be done by political appointees who typically come in for 2 to 3 years, takes them 6 months to figure out what's going on. 6 months before they leave, they're trying to figure out what they're going to do next. And then, they don't necessarily have the background, the interest, the ability, or the tenure to do the kind of stuff that we're talking about. It's major transformational change, but it needs to be done.
Right. Jimmy, you're up.
We need a general. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say that, I don't particularly trust these LinkedIn polls, and I know that Nick is going to word it until he gets the answer he wants.
That's true.
But we have to think about these things. I totally agree with the setup that Dave talked about at the beginning. Is you got to look at the whole thing, and picking on a department is not the optimal way to go about problem solving. And even though you have a personal grudge against this particular department, and in general, people are going to say we want less government. But I think it's true that bureaucracies get bloated. There's no question about it. I experienced this. I got a number of promotions in a corporate life, and when I was a first level manager, the second level manager told me when we came to budgeting, ask for more than you need, so that you can give back some. And so everybody was asking for more than they needed. And that was just a general way of going about it. So you had bloating, even in corporations. And this was kind of like, if you didn't do that, somebody else would, and you would be doing more work with less people. So you had to play the game. The other thing is the Department of Labor does things like equal opportunity, worker safety, and to get back to the what the federal government should do and what the states could do, we would still have states with slavery if the federal government didn't have a role. So there are certain things that we say, to be part of the United States, you have to do this. You might argue about any particular example, but like minimum wage is one of the things that it's oversight. I do believe in oversight and enforcement. I think that's really what the role should be, to make sure that there are people that all of these things are in compliance with the way that as a country we want workers to be treated. And so this department definitely has a role to play. And we can talk about what it is, but to say, we'll save 15 billion, people are going to say, yes, I want to save 15 billion. But, the deficit bloomed during the Trump years too. So, the last time the budget was balanced was under Clinton, so everybody gets some blame here. We can't pick on a particular president or a particular policy. This government bloating is a problem, and what we can leave to the states and what should be federally mandated is not a simple question. And we can reduce this stuff to such a simple thing that it's mindless, it's simplistic, and it's much more complicated than it's being implied here. Not by Dave. I think he set the stage quite right. We can disagree on particular issues, what should be mandated, what should be given up to the states to decide. But we have to realize that not all states would be enforcing these things if we didn't say, as a country, they should and they need to, and they'll be held to account if they don't.
Okay, Rick Rossner, then
There are some MAGA states that like do knuckleheaded stuff, like Arkansas. You know, has reduced the laws against child labor. So when you, I mean, but you know, most states are going to be competently run, but occasionally you're going to get some ridiculous stuff happening in the states. So 15 billion out of 33 trillion in debt is less than 1/20th of 1%. Every billion you spend costs or should cost every American $3 because there are 1/3 of a billion Americans. So you're saying that the Department of Labor costs every American $45 a year. And is it worth it? I don't know. I do know I'm under a pension, a Writers Guild pension, and I do like seeing the yearly audit results that say that the Writers Guild is competently managed, that they get that your pension gets a green light, yellow light, red light. And we've, even during the crash of 2008, we maintained a green light. And you were talking about private equity firms. You let a private equity firm take over your company, and often they're just interested in stripping out assets for temporary, profits. And then, the company is left just hollowed out, especially the pension.
Right. Jatovi.
I just wanted to agree with what Jim was saying. I mean, we have to think of things more so in more nuanced terms instead of the simplistic, hey, you know what? You can save 15 billion. You know what? I can lose some weight if I chop off my leg. If I chop off my leg, I can lose some weight quickly. That's not the way that works. So in the governmental, that's just a false narrative and used as a bumper sticker that gets votes. That's all that is. It's a fear tactic. I mean, rather than looking at what does the Labor Department touch? How does it help? What are ways that we can trim it truly? And what are the things that we trim? What is that going to affect? And for example, the IRS, we had brought that up earlier. IRS, it's underfunded and being starved. You know what? If we actually funded the IRS, that could help with our problem when we talk about taxation. And when we talk about the progressive tax rate, well, we're not bringing in that many taxes. Well, when you starve it to a point where those in IRS can only actually do the very simplistic IRS one or the IRS auditing, it's easy for them to do the smaller ones. But when you have a person who has multiple businesses in multiple areas, it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to need more automation. It's going to need more things. So what are all these things that are touched when you cut these departments? Because they had who was it, the CBO score, how right now the budget that the House Republicans are trying to push forward, talking about cutting the IRS, speaking of, the CBO score shows how that actually adds more to the budget because you aren't able to go after and actually pull the taxes from these individuals and actually pull those funds. So when you cut particular things, it affects other areas and it causes problems. So Dave, you're right. Yeah, we got to think of a way, but instead of just doing one department, we have to think of it as a whole. Okay, what does this touch? Where do we cut here? If we add in automation at this part of the department, how does that automation affect other parts of the government? And can we use automation across the whole government? So it's a bigger project than just let's cut this and we're done. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be integrated. It needs to be based upon a set of criteria that are clearly defined, consistently applied, well documented, and equally implemented. Back when Reagan was president, and my first presidential appointment was from Reagan. And by the way, it was as Assistant Secretary of Labor for EBSA. That was my first one. I've had three. Back then he had something called the Grace Commission. And the Grace Commission was named after William R. Grace. which came in and took a look at the organization and operations of government and made a number of recommendations about how to improve economy, efficiency, effectiveness, accountability. A number of the recommendations were adopted. Most of them were not adopted, but it also didn't have the kind of approach that the base closure or the BRAC commissions have, where you come up with recommendations, it's an up or down vote, okay? You don't cherry pick. I think it's time that we recognize that we need to do something similar with regard to the organization and operations of government. Probably after we end up doing, hopefully, a fiscal stability commission that will look at things like mandatory spending, discretionary spending, taxes, and how can we end up getting our debt to GDP macro down to a reasonable and sustainable level. We got to do that first, because most of the drivers have to do with spending and tax policy. And then what we're talking about is, once you decide what the federal government's going to do, how do you do it more economically, more efficiently, more effectively, more consistently, if you will?
I have a plan to save NASA millions of dollars based on what Toby said, that he'd way less if he cut off his leg. I suggest we use half-astronauts, people who lost both legs in war. You don't need legs in zero G, so we should use half-astronauts, legless astronauts. They'd cost, an astronaut weighs 100 pounds, is a lot cheaper to send into orbit. So,
Yeah,
just really quickly, David, this is my question and everything that I was curious about. Because if we abolish the Department of Labor, most people don't really deal with the Department of Labor until they are facing unemployment. So how would that transition occur? Because that's when most people have their interaction with the Department of Labor, is when they are collecting unemployment benefits, and that is a major concern. So how would that transition take place, and how would unemployment benefits go about during that time? Because that is the lifeline for many people. I know I've used it a couple of times as well as a lifeline when being between jobs and everything. So how would that transition take place? That's when most people interact with the Department of Labor.
But Mark, see, that's another example of needing for a more comprehensive look, okay? Because every state has a department that deals with unemployment, and unemployment is not administered by the federal government; it's administered by state and local governments, right? And so that's an example of what type of role and functions need to take place. All right. To the extent that government needs to do something, at what level of government needs to do it, okay? So again, that's another example of where, we need to do something with regard to unemployment. The question is, at what level, and to what extent is it done by government workers versus contracted? I mean, there are lots of different dimensions here that we need to think about. But, one of the challenges is, and I'm going into meetings at the Defense Department for the next 2 days because I'm on the Defense Business Board. And one of the things that we're talking about is that how do you change the culture of the business side of DOL? Because they don't really, they focus on war fighting. Okay. They focus on, preventing wars and being able to win wars if we have to do it. They don't focus on economy, efficiency, effectiveness, accountability. They don't. Okay. And that's a major cultural transformation that's got to take place, not just within the Defense Department, but also government-wide, because the environment is different externally, and the fiscal pressures are great and increasing, and the status quo is just unacceptable and unsustainable.
Yeah, Jacoby.
Just to touch on the focus on the cultural shift, the reason it focuses on the military area that is because that's money. That's instant money. It's the reason why arenas focus on alcohol, serving alcohol. That's why there used to be in college sports where it used to be dry. You couldn't serve alcohol at these sporting events. Well, they found out that a big money driver is alcoholic beverages. So what do they focus on? The Department of Labor. So our cultural shift in terms of the government mindset has to be more towards the people and less towards the money as well, because The more we focus on money, it's easy to chop $15 billion off if we forget about the people. So that's where we have to get at. That's where that cultural mind shift has to change, is that die hard money. Yes, money has to pay for things, and we all agree on that. But if your focus is only on money, yeah, there are going to be a lot of people left in the cracks.
Well, let me just mention a couple of things, macro and then micro for the Defense Department. Okay, although it's not really micro. Macro, the culture in the government in general, and there are always exceptions. You don't want to stereotype too much, but in general, it's get the money, spend the money. All right. In addition, you measure success by how big is your budget and how many people do you have. That's the culture. All right. It's not what do we accomplish with the resources and authorities that we have. So linking resources to results, which is what needs to happen. And that's what happens in the private sector, or you don't stay in business very, very long. In the case of the Defense Department, they're focused on mission. Mission is preventing wars and winning wars if we have to have a war. They are focused like a laser on that. And on that, we're an A. We have the best military in the world. Okay. Thank God. But they don't focus as much on economy, efficiency, effectiveness, accountability as it relates to taxpayer resources. So in other words, and a concrete example of that is if you look at the size of the war fighting force, so total military headcount since 2020, since 2000, it's actually down. On the other hand, if you look at the number of people who are part of mission support and the amount of money that we're spending on overhead, it's up significantly. All right. Mm-hmm. So the concept that people talk about there is tooth to tail. The tooth is the war fighting capability. The tail is the mission support and overhead, et cetera. And so you got to go after that, because now what we have is we have a peer competitor called China. We have changing alliances against U.S. interests led by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So we have increasing threats. At the same point in time, we have increasing fiscal pressures. And in the Defense Department, it's not going to be exempt from that, nor should they be exempt from that, if you will. So, but again, coming back to what we said, we need comprehensive, integrated, approach to deal with this that ultimately will span the entire government.
Right.
Hey, David, just really quickly along those same lines and everything, I was just curious with this idea of abolishing the Department of Labor, because I know one of the other roles of the Department of Labor is discussion with big business about wage and working conditions and all along those lines. And we have seen a rise in the union,
wage and hour.
And we've seen a rise in union activities. Yeah, and we've seen a rise in the union activity over the last year. I know that there's a major strike. I think it's still going on with the hospitality workers there in Las Vegas. There is, of course, the one that went on with the auto workers, and of course, the one that is where Jim and Rick are in Hollywood that went on with the Hollywood writers. And there have been a number of other ones. I think even their air traffic controllers and some others have had strikes. So I just wonder, if we were to abolish the Department of Labor, would this be something that you think most unions would be behind, or would they have a issue with it, since that is part of the government that they oftentimes are negotiating with?
Well, first, let's understand a couple of things. The portion of the economy that has by far the highest percentage of unionized workers, not even close, is the government. The government has by far the highest percentage of unionized workers. And I don't know if you recall it or not, but government workers were not allowed, federal government workers were not allowed to unionize until Kennedy was president. You weren't allowed to have a union. And now that's a big part of the transformational change. Secondly, one of the reasons that we've had more strikes and other types of activities recently is because inflation got out of control. All right. And people are saying, look, my wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living. And enough is enough. back when inflation, was 1%, 1.5%, which it was for a number of years. Okay, and after we ended up having the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, then people were saying, okay, we understand. But once inflation started getting out of control, then people said, look, we already gave. You need to give something to us. Now, one of the concerns that I have is, well, you can have wage-driven inflation too, right? So we got to make sure that people are treated fairly, but you can't get out of control, because if it gets out of control, then you're going to end up stoking more inflation. Okay, if that ends up being the case. So, look, I come back to what I said. I think we have to analyze what needs to be done. And clearly there are some things that the Department of Labor does that need to be done at the federal level. Okay? What needs to be done? But there are other things that could be done at lower levels of government. And I think that's why I'm saying we need to kind of take a more comprehensive assessment. And for the record, I'm not for abolishing the Department of Labor, but I am for subjecting the Department of Labor to a fundamental review and reassessment, as well as every other major departments and agencies, in light of where we are, where we're headed, and what makes sense for the future.
Yeah, Rick.
So we need to get the money out of electoral politics so that people with expertise want to run for office. Right now, half of the job, maybe more than half, is of the job of a congressperson is raising money, and just cold calling people and begging for money for their next election. And the kind of people who will tolerate that as being their job often aren't the best people. Today, Marjorie Taylor Greene is holding hearings into the COVID vaccine. Marjorie Taylor Greene is not a person with expertise. And I mean, we'll have a generational change. Everybody under 30 now knows how to code, which means that there's a 73-year-old congressman who's sending himself back to college to learn what AI actually means. We'll have a generational change, and we'll get people with expertise that may help streamline the government, but that'll happen faster if our electoral policies change so fewer knuckleheads get elected.
Two things real quick, and then I'm going to have to go in 5 minutes. One, we clearly need campaign finance reform in light of the Supreme Court decision. That's going to take a constitutional amendment. It's probably not going to be achieved through the normal legislative process of 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate of the states. It's probably going to require a convention of states to propose one. All right. And I would support that, but only after we have a convention of states to propose a fiscal responsibility amendment, because if we don't get our finances in order, a lot of these other things, quite frankly, aren't going to matter. Oh, by the way, that's why you have witnesses. The reason you have witnesses at congressional hearings is those are the people that are actually supposed to know something about the topic. Don't count on the members knowing.
But people are expecting Marjorie Taylor Greene to.
Jim's next.
Jim's got his hand up. Jim's had his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And Dave, I know you got to run, but I thought you did an excellent job setting the stage and putting it more articulately than I would as what happens, because we must look at this as a comprehensive problem. If you pick on a certain department and you say, we'll save so much money if we abolish it, that's just a ridiculous approach. Because, the Department of Labor does do things that we all agree are necessary. People, it's just one of those things that, did it get bloated? Does it do things that it shouldn't do? Yeah. And we concentrate on just that department. We'd be missing so many opportunities, because as we took a look at the Defense Department and all of the inefficiencies that are involved in that, that's up to a lot more than 15 billion. So come on.
Over 800 billion.
Yeah. So, this is like, we're playing a game here when we really should be serious about talking about these things. And how do we go about comprehensively looking at government? Because we can all agree that it's bloated, and it does need trimming. And how are we going to agree on doing that? And I do think it goes back to the voters voting people into office that are competent. And finance reform is absolutely necessary. I think that Citizens United was the worst Supreme Court decision since Dred Scott. So, we have to think, how are we going to get money out of politics so that we have people that are really solid citizens first and foremost running for office to represent the people that they're their constituents, because we've gotten away from that. And so when we have a Congress that's loggerheads like this, it's ineffective. So what are we talking about, passing legislation to do these things? How are you going to get it done? So we got to get back to what is, first off, if you define the problem accurately, it's half solved. And we aren't defining it accurately if we say, let's cut this department out. That's not looking at the real.
Yeah, Jim, I'm going to have to go, but let me just come back a couple of things. One,
Sure.
Let's take the broader fiscal challenge, which we've talked about before. And I have a little bit of cautious optimism that something may end up happening that I've been fighting for years. One, the need for a statutory fiscal stability commission to be able to engage the American people, the facts, the truth, the tough choices, make a package of recommendations where everything's on the table. Not everything's equal, but everything's on the table, up or down vote. That's a perfect example of, we know we got a problem, but we're going to have a special process in order to solve the problem, because if we think that Congress is going to make all the tough choices through the regular order in a piecemeal fashion in a timely manner, we're kidding ourselves. At the same point in time, we also have to recognize that government's grown dramatically. They've lost control of the budget, right? Statutory approaches like the debt ceiling and other kinds of approaches have failed. One Congress can't bind the next Congress, and so therefore you need a constitutional amendment. That's the only thing that can bind current and future Congresses. Right? Same thing for the issue we're talking about here. We know a lot needs to be done, but it's going to take a special process to get it done because of all the reasons that we've talked about and many more, and its day will come. So I got to go. You guys close it out. I'm glad to be back with you. And
Welcome home.
Take care.
Thank you.
Be good.
Glad to have you back.
Now he's gone, so we can do our food fight then.
Voice of reason, very voice of reason.
David's just the voice of reason. So Jatovi, the other voice, can hear.
You took a shot at you. Yes.
Just to get back to the political or the money out of politics, that's going to be impossible until we do anything to where we cap what people can fundraise to, until we cap what people can fundraise and spend. For example, political ads going into 2024 are supposed to break $12 billion.
Whoa.
Do you know that we could spend that money elsewhere? So imagine if we had a cap on the amount of money that people could raise. So instead of we bragging about how Trump this month raised $100 million, well, what if he had a cap? And what if we could judge our elected officials based on how well they spend the money that they are raised to on that cap? Think about how they would then budget. But again, getting money out of politics is going to be almost impossible, because right now money is seen, well, power is seen as money. And once you get into politics, what do you go for? Money. I mean, you take the gentleman in New Jersey, Menendez, who found with gold bars and all this other stuff. He jumped into he was probably in politics for a good reason, but then found out he could get money. Marjorie Taylor Greene is in it for the money. Plenty of politicians now found a way to get money out of politics. George Santos did it for money. He had bills. He wanted to pay bills. So it's going to be tough if we can figure a way. If you want to solve that, that could actually be the start to changing the mindset in politics. If we want to stay on that topic that we are, rather than getting into the food fight, we can. I mean,
Toby,
I bring a buffet.
Toby, how are we going to get money out of
No,
politics when?
I
Go
wanna
I
ahead.
think
add
Jim
to
was
it.
next, by the way.
All right, Kim.
Jatovi, I think you got a point there to cap the political campaign funds, but better yet, they can't and are not allowed to raise money. They have to utilize a system, because today everything is Zoom and information based through some sort of online services or OTT platform. So I think somewhere there needs to be one platform. All of the politicians go there. They tell the story, what they want to do. No mudslinging, no pointing fingers, no fear factor. It's all my story, and this is what I will do for you, kind of like the Voice, right? And then people can go and look at them and watch them. Maybe define some debates for people to engage in, especially the higher offices. But we no longer need for them to be raising money. We no longer need for them to be traveling from state to state, city to city, town to town. We need for them to be doing their job. Okay, a majority of them spend this last year, instead of sitting in the office doing their job, campaigning, raising money, and that needs to stop. I agree. But no more campaign funds, none. Everything is done through an AI platform, and we eliminate the corruption. We eliminate the parties and the party favors and the control. And we get down to the basics, like what you want, and potentially put in people who are not there just for the money. But I want to say something to that factor. That's the only reason why anyone runs for political office today. No one runs for the greater good. No one.
Yes. Jimmy.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to get back to this money in politics thing. There's a book, Sasha Starr turned me on to this, Dark Money by Jane Mayer. And because of Citizens United, there's so much money that we can't track who's funding who. So even if you pass these laws that say you can't spend more than this dark money will find a way to promote their candidate. And so we've got to talk about getting rid of Citizens United and getting back to monitoring the money that is being used, so that we know who's supporting a particular candidate. Because right now we don't. And it takes investigative journalism in order to find out who's really behind Donald Trump, for example. If he raised $100 million, where did it come from? Did it come from the Koch brothers? We don't know that. Well, in 2020 it did. In 2024 it probably won't. Where's their money going to go? To who? We want to track that, but we can't. Unless we're really smart investigative journalists.
You guys are just no fun at all. Jatovi.
Just to tie, because I think we're all in agreement on that. But I think the way that we can tie it together, yes, Citizens United was horrible. That was dumb. That was dark money. It was dark money. It just allowed the flow of dark money. And now, yeah, just like Jim was talking about, yeah, you can't track it. It can come from anywhere and everywhere. And now that person has allegiance to the people that, are choosing domestic terrorism over. Yeah, see, dark money is bad. You never want dark money. So it'd be great to be able to monitor and track that. And then for Kim, I think it would be even better. Got you one even better, where it would be the parties themselves, not the candidate. The candidate would only be allowed to campaign for a particular amount of time. We'll say maybe about 4 months. That would be the only time that they would be able to go out and travel. But then the actual party themselves would be the one required to fundraise. And then based on that amount, the amount of money that they have, they are capped at a particular amount for those 4 months. But then on top of that, the money that is not spent goes to a charity voted on by those who actually donated. That would be something that could be worthwhile. That, hey, if we cap it at $100 million, but they raise $2 billion, well, you know what? That money can now go to whatever charitable organizations are down the list on those that people that voted on.
I might
Rick.
be wrong. I often am, but I think in France, candidates are only allowed to campaign for during the 6 weeks before the election.
You're right.
There you go.
Yeah, I think you're right
Mark.
there and everything. Yeah, just really quickly, since you want a little bit of food fight and everything, I'll throw some food into the matter and everything in the last 5 minutes. What about the notion of two of the biggest lobbies probably coming from the Middle East, and should we eliminate their money? Because I'm thinking that both Qatar and Israel are putting a lot of money into various candidates and all along those lines. So should we eliminate foreign money and all in that space because they have a vested interest in certain things going on and everything? So are we going to eliminate that as well?
To throw the food back, yes, I would say that yes, all campaign donations should come from within be it a state election, should come from within that state. If it is a national election, should come from the nation. Foreign money should go to donations towards charitable groups and not towards the actual political action committees.
Or to universities. Foreign money should go to the universities and our education system because we educate most of them for free. So,
I mean, don't get me wrong, they do educate us for free if you go to Germany and other places.
Pay for our students.
Yeah, just to let you know, because it was many years ago, and you know this woman that I'm going to mention everything. There have been a few candidates, namely my mom, that ran for office with a sense of integrity and not necessarily trying to get the money and all along those lines when she ran for Secretary of State. Unfortunately, the woman that she lost to, has actually been in office forever because Elaine Marshall has had that job ever since she defeated Mom and then defeated Richard Petty as well. So I think she's had it for about 20 or 25 years.
Sounds like you have a grudge.
We started the show with a grudge.
Yeah.
We did start the show with a grudge.
Just slightly.
Dust it off. Dust off that chip on the shoulder,
We're going to
boys.
put another fact out there and that you all like. Here it is. In 1913 and before that, there was no Department of Labor in the U.S. And we did just fine without it. Now, it was the Department of Commerce and Labor.
I disagree.
So they pushed it down. We did okay. As we know, the United States.
This is why people hate lawyers.
Are we starting to make the Ford Model T again?
Hold on a second. No, that debate is far positive.
Everything was great before 1913.
To Toby and Jim, this is for both of you as we're winding down and everything. But if we have this idea of a vote of the people, and I like this idea of a vote of the people, kind of like the voice, as Kim just put it, how are we going to eliminate, because y'all are much more knowledgeable in this lane, particularly you, Jacoby, than I am, the notion of people cheating? Because we do know that if you have folks making a call and everything, how are they not going to call 100 times in order to get their vote out there 100 times if they are, say, supporting Trump and everything? So any ideas that you've got if we're going to have electoral elections that are done the way of the telephone poll or the voice method?
We had this conversation last night in Australia, and they're pushing for digital ID, and I believe it's probably for elections more than it is to invade people's privacy. But of course, we're going to be afraid of digital ID. But I think that there is some form of IDing people. In some countries, they paint your hand after you vote. So there's got to be a stamping system that we can come up with. We're highly intelligent, and I think that we can figure it out, Mark. I think that the people's voice and vote should matter more than any of the parties that are involved. And the electoral has just caused more problems than it has solved.
And unfortunately, our votes have now been eliminated because we're out of time. So we'll see you next week on